At one point in India, we had just arrived, and we went in Vrindavan, and we went right into Prabhupada's room for darshan, which was filled with, devotees, maybe 24 devotees. And I sat in the back with my son and my daughter. And actually, I think I just had my daughter, because my son stayed outside at that point. But I sat down quietly. My daughter got up. She was 1 year old, and she started walking up to Prabhupada. And the brahmachari at the door started waving me down, trying to get my attention. No, get her, bring her back. He's like motioning me to get the child and bring her back. You can't do that, And I just sort of looked at him like, looked out of the corner of my eye, saw him waving at me, and conveniently ignored him and looked at Prabhupada and made a motion like should I go get her, And Prabhupada put his hand up to stop, He said, no, just sit down. Because he could see the brahmachari flipping out at the door. And then I looked at Prabhupada for the last instruction on that. I wasn't going to just accept this fellow at the door. So he told me to sit, and Shantaya proceeded to walk up to Prabhupada's desk, and I had no idea what she was going to do up there at one. She started to look around Prabhupada's desk and walk around, and then she looked at Prabhupada, and she walked over to him and crawled right across his lap and sat down on his lap. So everything else, all other conversations stopped as she took the show with Prabhupada, just exchanging their exchanges at that point, where he was playing with her and giving her a flower, and she was playing with his garland, and then she moved on and crawled off his lap, and he gave her a flower to take with her, and she came, then he nodded to me to come and take her, and so I picked her up and took her back to sit down. But it was just Prabhupada's, his unlimited exchanges, with whoever, no matter what age they were, no matter who the devotee was, it was his, the relationship building. He was always exchanging in a sweet relationship, even with the youngest children.
One time I was serving Srila Prabhupada in Vrindavan, and as his custom was, after he would give evening darshan, he would distribute prasadam. So as a servant, he would nod, and you would run up, and usually had a jar of sweet balls on his desk. So I came up, he was giving darshan in the evening, Brijbasis were there, so many were there, and he nodded. So I went up and I opened the jar, and there were ants all over the sweet balls. So I said, Srila Prabhupada, the ants are eating the sweet balls, thinking I couldn't pass them out. Srila Prabhupada looked at me and said, it is okay, they do not eat very much.
Going back, my parents had come with me, so they walked the path. And then later that evening, there was a darshan, and I was asked to come because I had my parents. And while we sat, we were making dolls, puppet dolls in Detroit, so I was asked to carry it. Prabhupada asked me, what is that you have? And I said, well, it's a puppet, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, this, you must not do this because people will think we're worshipping dolls. So I was, then someone came and took the puppet. Then later on in the darshan, my parents were with me, and he was asking for questions. Prabhupada was asking questions. And so my father raised his hand, and he said, well, you were mentioning that Christians are saying, give us our daily bread, but actually, the animals are eating. Prabhupada was explaining that there's no need in Christians. And so my father said, well, what about, we're not just asking for bread, we're asking for cake, we're asking for everything. And Prabhupada instantly cut him off and said, what do you know? What are you knowing? And he went on to further the point, and he just dismissed, so we were kind of both dismissed immediately. My father's reaction was a little bit stunned, and he really didn't have a comeback for him. Luckily, he didn't argue with him. He just kind of let it. I think the environment, we were all squished in a room. Prabhupada obviously was the authoritative figure, and he wasn't about to start a huge fight with him. He was upset. Both his daughters, only daughters, had joined, so he had a little charge in there.
We were walking along, and maybe everyone has heard this by now, but we were walking along, Prabhupada stopped. Now, I grew up near the beach, and I used to surf and live, camp on the beach a lot overnight. And like a lot of other people, I suppose, I always really enjoyed the sound of the waves as they break and then draw back out. It makes kind of that, that real pleasing sound as it comes in and then ebbs back out. And we stopped and we were listening to that for a minute. Prabhupada stopped on the beach, and then he said, this sound of the waves retreating is the sound of the gopis sighing for Krishna. And I always thought, well, no wonder it's so pleasing. And ever since then, when I hear that sound, of course, I think of that, and how it is really kind of a mournful, bittersweet sound, so that was nice.
So I found a piece of cloth. Again, back then, we couldn't even afford to have flowers in the temple. It was temples usually didn't even have telephones back then. The payphone around the corner was the method of communication. So we didn't have any money or something to give Srila Prabhupada, but I found a cloth in an abandoned Catholic church. Old, rustic thing, and in the cloth itself was a beautiful piece of luxurious velvet with some trim on it. So I showed it to Srila Prabhupada and said, could you use this? And actually, Govinda Dasi saw it, and she said, Tosan Krishna wants to know if you want this. And things were being packed. Srila Prabhupada's pointing, put this thing away, put this here, now roll this, put this here. He's being very exacting. And he says, I want nothing. And the room shook. It was just like Lord Nrsingadev had entered the room. We were just, Srila Prabhupada so sweet, and then I want nothing. The room shook. And I didn't know what was going to happen with that piece of cloth after that. Well, I did visit Srila Prabhupada in Los Angeles only 2 months later, and Srila Prabhupada was using it as his backdrop for his deities. So I thought it was, he wants nothing, but he'll engage it for his deities.